My background is in electrical engineering, but I went into BD, marketing and sales, 20 something years ago. And that was an interesting story. But main reason was I was much more excited about new technology and the customer side. I needed to make sure that whatever we were building was applicable to the customer I was in front of. So it was very interesting because the sales guy that I worked with wasn't doing a great job and was more so telling a lot of stories that weren't honest. And so I asked my boss, because he wanted me to go into sales, and I said I would never do it, but I did, and I did both sides. But fast forward 20 something years, the last corporate was about 13 years ago, and I ran BD marketing and sales out of the Valley, California, and covered all of Canada, US, and South America. And at that time, I was there for 5 years. The company was really out of Denmark, but also ran initiatives in product development and marketing in Japan and Europe. So I was there every year helping with those two initiatives because we had 3 different regions of the globe. But it was at that time that I also started mentoring postdocs. And the reason being is I'm excited about innovation, but more excited about how people are using it and those that are inventing it. So that even though I'm not a postdoc, the reason why I started mentoring postdocs because they were coming to me and looking for ways to launch their products, and they were trying to figure out this commercialization path. And then after that, and there were some cool things that went on, and then I launched Fruition Tech Labs, which is when I knew you and Sean back then. But the goal then was to help postdocs and engineers and then startups take their ideas and launch. And the reason being is I realized that the entrepreneurs dedicate a lot of time and energy into their business idea, and it's a major loss. It's a major life loss as I look at it when they don't make it. A lot of them. I mean, I would say the most of the ones I meet, it's a major life loss. It's not just, oh, that didn't work out. It's not like a career didn't work out or a job didn't work out. This is something they've dedicated their lives to, their money, their time, their family. So,
so given that, I'm curious, are there themes that you see that this is why it tends to fail? Like, are there buckets? Like what? Because when you come from postdoc, deep technical expertise, right? Yeah. So it's not that. It's the business side of things. It's the making the relationships to bring in the. I mean, how would you bucket it? What would you say is the most common failure point? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I would say the most common one is the founder gets fully in love with what they're building and they lose sight of everything else. And so they're not very coachable and they don't consider the business side as much as is needed to consider the business side. So they come in not knowing what they don't know, and unfortunately they make very bad decisions. And so
founders aren't great CEOs all the time, is that?
No. So anytime I work with a founder, that's one of our first discussions is, are you willing to find someone else to be the CEO?
Yeah.
And it's a discussion that has to happen if you're going to engage. Right?
Yeah. Okay, so I want to pivot a little bit because one of the things I think you know extremely well is like the ecosystem of Houston, but also the other cities in Texas and outside of Texas. So just want to get your thoughts on what do we have that's a strength in Texas? What are things that we do that are maybe better to our benefit? Maybe things that we should promote more, sing the praises of?
So I would say some of the best things obviously is the cost of living, the cost of real estate. But then also we're at this early stage in Texas where innovation is at its infancy. Now, on one end, you can look at it as a downside because we're not experts yet, and that's always a challenge because you need a bigger brother, bigger sister somewhere helping you. But we have the knowledge base. We just need to learn how to use that knowledge we have and begin to build and strengthen the ecosystem and draw people in. The cool thing, though, is I'm seeing a lot of VCs, as I mentioned earlier in our discussions, looking to invest in Texas, in startups in Texas, because they're not going to compete with other VCs in the East and West Coast. Number one, the cost of living and the burn rate of cash is a whole lot slower and less here in Texas, right, than it is in those two different regions of the U.S. And also, most of the VCs we've been working with, because we're onboarding 2 to 3 a week now, and yes, those numbers are accurate. It's been pretty interesting. They want to come in as lead investors because they feel they can get a good position in an early stage startup with equity and with the cost of shares, right? So I think those are some very unique advantages that Texas has. I would say the workforce still needs to, it's not grow necessarily, just grow the workforce, but begin to train the workforce to think of have an entrepreneurial mindset, right? Yeah. Our educational system, which I studied out a lot and helped a lot of ed tech companies, is heavily focused on the industrial age, right? And that hasn't changed in umpteen years. And so we're graduating students out of high school and also in college to be workforce minded, and it's a whole different ballgame than an entrepreneur, and that I think we need to slide in there.
Yeah. So who's doing that well? Like, what are models of someone who's successful in building an entrepreneur mindset?
Well, to be honest with you, I would say it's the schools like the Montessori schools, the Waldorf. I'm going to say even I mean, some universities have good entrepreneurship programs. I would say because I've been part of the Bauer. I've been part of the Bauer School of Business for about 7 years. I've worked with about 700-800 students over the years. They do a good job, but the Wolf Center at U of H is doing an excellent job, and they're.
So like Montessori is very early.
Yeah.
So what can we do later? Like, what are there short-term programs that kind of help folks? Like, is this the thing you get into undergrad? Right, this is an opportunity to kind of insert this mindset.
Yeah, I would say you get this even in high school, because as the study shows, once they graduate from high school, a lot of them have been influenced into the workforce. Naturally, those that survive, right?
Yeah.
Those that fit in the system, those that are, those that have been trained, or they say untrained to be creative and trained to fall in line. But there are a lot of studies, there are a lot of videos out there that talk about that.
Yeah, well, so we had this discussion point on another interview. We were talking about innovation in life sciences, med tech, and how it's often incremental, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, we have used this widget for 50 years. It's time to improve the widget a little bit. But I think what you're talking about is this creative out of the box thinking where it's paradigm shifting, right? And so do you think the med tech, biotech space allows for that, right? Like, often it's provider, this type has this problem, let's solve it. But what if it's like, I think of like a Facebook. There was no one going around saying, the problem is we need a social network that allows us to talk. But that's the true innovation. That's the thing that changed everything. Sure. So how do you do that in the med tech, biotech?
So I would say this, with all the hospitals I've spoken to in Houston that have innovation centers, they do have a ton of nurses and physicians and healthcare workers that have new ideas. Now it's being able to facilitate those ideas to the next stage. Yeah. And so it's not as if they're not there. I think there's you kind of mentioned it earlier. They come out, they have these ideas, but they necessarily don't want to run a business. Mm-hmm. They want to see it developed and used, but all the facilitators for these idea generators, they say they struggle getting them to do a lot of the business work, right? Yeah. So most accelerators and incubators will focus on all the business. Here's the business steps. And they start doing this, and there's a great book called The E-Myth, right? The founder, the visionary, starts a business, and they're excited of the product they're building, but then they get halfway through this and they go, I never wanted to run a company. I don't want to handle employees. I don't want to do all these things that has to do with the business. I just want to solve the problem and let somebody else do it. But I think that's where there's a bottleneck, is being able to switch gears with these visionary founders that have an idea and not trying to shove them through business courses. Yeah.
Or provide an avenue for them to say, here's the idea, kind of run with it, and all that wraparound is provided.
Yes, which I would say some universities do a good job at that. I would have to say, and I'm very non-biased, very, very non-biased. But Rice, I've seen multiple companies come out of Rice where they partnered with the postdoc there, and and they use the postdoc, the developer of the IP, and they've created some good, solid, large companies out of that. And so I think that's a really good thing, is when a university, an educational or research center opens up, kind of like their doors to work with some of their researchers that have developed IP.
Yeah. I think this is so. When I was shaping the portfolio at the Defense Health Agency for medical research products, if I brought in the providers, like the medic or the physician, their solutions were very targeted. And so that's how we work in the DoD. It's like, yeah, that incremental widget, I guess that's what we need. But when we're talking larger scale civilian world, I do think that, like, it's, and I'm going to say this in probably every one of these podcasts, the Henry Ford quote, where it's like, I'm going to the people and I say, what do you want? And they say, I want a faster horse. And you're like, of course you want a faster horse, but I'm building you a car. And you never thought about a car, and it does all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And so when you get providers, physicians, and all, it's the therapists, they see their world and their problem sets, and I think they think of these solutions that have great impact, but they're not always disruptive in the same way. And so I'm always like, what's that balance of, like, I can go talk to the emergency medicine doctor who wants to intubate a little bit faster, and those are great tools, but maybe there's like a whole new paradigm shift. And so where does that come from? And how do we foster those ideas? Going to your Montessori school approach, because that emergency medicine doctor has been trained in his or her specialty and thinks in that mindset. So what's the Montessori approach to intubation?
So that's good. So what I like to do is partner of a entrepreneur that is going to look at it from a business side, and then does all the market research, does some of the customer research and interviews, right? So this person has this idea, and so I do this all the time. Someone comes in and says, hey, Wes, here's my idea, and then I look at all the different verticals and horizontals of how this new product is going to solve a problem. And then depending on how much impact, what are the obstacles to launch, what are the investors going to look at, right? And now this person's one idea may need to take a different path before it actually hits what they intended it for. But it creates sustainability and scalability. And so it's finding those, when I find somebody like that, I always try to find the right entrepreneur, business-minded person that is strategic, right? And this always comes back to what the investors are looking for. But going back to the Montessori school, because this is important, we were a team of about 10, went into a Montessori school to review their projects, and they all had ideas. These were first, second, third graders.
Okay.
And at the end, this was about 3 hours, 4 hours. And so they're all ladies and gentlemen, all in there, and we're all business people. I go to the guy leading this. I said, hey, these ideas are really good. I said, these ideas are better than some of the adults. He goes, I know. He says, can you collect the ones you feel are good? We're going to go talk to their parents. And I was shocked, because this is the first time I saw a second and a third-year-old. And the way they described it, they drew out their problem, their solution. This was at a level that you would see a college graduate developing. Now, maybe the drawings weren't, but their thought process was extremely creative, and they thought through how to solve the problem. And again, when you look at a lot of studies regarding, and they actually call it a paradigm shift in the way we teach our children, but this innovative mind is non-discriminate, and it's being able to find them and help them grow and foster it, and then connecting them to the right people to build that new novel tech.
Yeah. I love that. So where we're sitting Velocity, we do a lot of community engagement, and there's opportunities to get involved in younger ages, but a lot of what we get is like folks who have been trained in a system. And so how do you give them components to help them have that innovative mindset, knowing that they were already essentially 95% cooked in a system that shaped them a certain way?
So there's this gentleman at TMC named Jason. He runs the biodesign, and he is very passionate about helping Black and brown women founders. And something he shared with me a couple of years ago, he says, Wes, it's not just that they don't have the opportunity. And he says the opportunity can be given to them, but they are not even on that playing field where this is something I can do. Mm-hmm. And it's being able to give people vision for themselves, right? Oh, this is something I can actually accomplish, right? I'm 61, and this past year I realized, you know what? I could have been a doctor. I mean, my whole life I said, well, nah, that's just not for me, and I don't think I could ever do that. That's more than that I'm capable of. But now I look at it from a different perspective. Yeah. Well, yes, I can, and here's why I know I can. I may still, but I may not. But I think it's helping people have vision for themselves and show them that they're capable of doing things that maybe their family never considered. Yeah. Right? So you coming out of a family that is a blue collar worker, or not even there, you're not at that. It's very few people realize they can actually do that, and being provided that motivation and vision for themselves.
So I had an interesting experience in grad school in New Orleans where they were filming movies. It became a Hollywood of the South. Yeah. And while we were there, lots of movie production. And I don't know anything about movies, so I don't know all the stages and the career ladders that live. So I would never pursue that. Yeah. It was this realization to me that, like, well, one thing I would never do is lead the videography for this movie thing, because I don't know anything about that. But anyway, it's this idea that I didn't know that was a job series to approach, and like how. So that's just like one little, I totally understand. Yeah. If you've never seen it, why would you pursue it? You wouldn't know to pursue it. Yeah. But a counterpoint to go to this innovative mindset, like, you're building things that have never existed. So there is no prototype. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that you're following. You're just like pulling stuff together. Yeah. So how do you reconcile those things? How do we give people the skills to define the undefined? Yeah. Or, what is...
Yeah, so that is good. There's always going to be a level of the unknown, right? There's going to be the level of unknown, the fear of failure, and those things. The only thing that causes us not to push forward, I would say, is what are the consequences of not being successful, and what does that look like? And a lot of the companies, the great companies we know about, they had, like Dyson had, I don't know how many failures before he eventually made it. But I think it's being able to give people the freedom to fail and helping them understand what that looks like, because failing means it's the next step to success. And I know we talk about it in a lot of different ways, but we really don't teach people to live it and embrace it. And so a lot with the startups that I'm working with, I worked with some that are going on 10 years. And they have moved very little. There's one that came back into my life 2 months ago, and my wife says, "Oh no, not them again." And I took it on, and just because I have a little bit of equity in them, and it's been actually interesting because the market is not only more aligned for his product, but the technology is far more advanced for him, and we all agree now the time is now. Now, he's had countless failures since 2014, so it's going on 12 years. Yeah. But now's the time. Yeah. And I think we got to teach people that sometimes it's going to take you a while, and failing is only when you give up, and being okay with it and not say it in a way that it's, cliche. And I think that's very, very important, and begin to teach them this journey. I'm all about the journey more than about the results, because it's a journey to get there, and it's not, you need to get a result today. And even though that's corporate, and I talked about that at lunch, the corporate mindset needs to switch to an entrepreneurial mindset and look at it. This is the journey of my life, and it's not these set milestones of a career.